AITA for refusing to help my sister financially after she asked me to cover her rent because she overspent on her wedding. I have always been the responsible one in my family. Growing up, I was the kid who saved up her allowance instead of spending it on candy or toys. I was the one who learned about budgeting early, the one who made spreadsheets for my expenses, the one who always had an emergency fund in case life threw something unexpected my way. My younger sister, Lily, was the complete opposite. She was always the dreamer, the free spirit, the one who believed things would somehow always work out in the end. And for the most part, they did, because someone was always there to bail her out. Our parents, our relatives, even me on a few occasions. When Lily got engaged 2 years ago, she immediately started talking about her dream wedding. And when I say dream wedding, I mean a full-blown, magazine cover, Instagram-worthy extravaganza. We're talking a venue that looked like it was straight out of a fairy tale, a designer dress that probably cost more than my car, a live band, custom floral arrangements, a 5-course dinner for over 200 guests, and a honeymoon in the Maldives. I remember asking her early on how she and her fiancé, Jake, were planning to pay for all of it, especially since they weren't exactly rolling in money. Jake has a decent job, and Lily works, but neither of them make the kind of income that allows for a 6-figure wedding without serious financial planning. Lily just laughed it off and said, "We'll figure it out." That was always her answer. She brushed aside my concerns and told me that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, that it had to be perfect, that she didn't want to settle for less just because of something as temporary as money. She also hinted, several times, that she expected some help from family. Our parents don't have a ton of extra cash, but they still chipped in a significant amount. I helped in smaller ways, buying her a few things from her wedding registry, covering my bridesmaid dress, and paying for part of her bridal shower. But I was never under the impression that I was expected to foot a major part of the bill. The wedding itself was stunning, there's no denying that. It was the kind of event people talked about for weeks afterward. Guests raved about the open bar, the extravagant decor, the over-the-top dessert table, the fireworks display at the end of the night. It was beautiful, sure, but I couldn't shake this nagging thought in the back of my mind, how the hell were they paying for all of this? I got my answer a few weeks later when I received a call from Lily. The second I picked up, I could hear she had been crying. She sounded desperate, her voice shaking as she told me she was in trouble. They had maxed out their credit cards, she said. The wedding had cost way more than they expected, and they had nothing left. Rent was due in a few days, and they simply didn't have it. She asked if I could cover their rent for the next 3 months until they got back on their feet. I took a deep breath. I love my sister, I really do. But I also knew this was exactly what I had feared would happen. I asked her how they had let things get this bad, and she got defensive. She insisted that they had to go all out for the wedding, that cutting corners wasn't an option, that they thought they would be fine but had just underestimated some costs. I asked if they had any savings left, and she admitted they had drained everything they had. Their honeymoon alone had cost more than what she was now asking me for, which made it even harder for me to justify helping. I told her as gently as I could that I wasn't comfortable bailing them out, especially given the circumstances. I explained that I didn't want to enable reckless financial decisions and that this should be a wake-up call for her and Jake to start making smarter choices. She lost it. She accused me of being cold, of abandoning her in her time of need, of caring more about stupid financial principles than my own sister. She threw in that if I really loved her, I would help without hesitation, because family comes first. I stood my ground. I told her that I had worked hard to build my financial security and that I wasn't going to jeopardize my own stability to fix a problem she had created for herself. I reminded her that they had plenty of opportunities to scale back, that no one forced them to have a wedding they couldn't afford. She hung up on me, and shortly after, I started getting calls from our parents. They were upset, saying that I was being too harsh, that family is supposed to be there for each other, that I had more than enough money to help, so why wouldn't I? My mom even told me that if the roles were reversed, Lily would never let me struggle like this. I highly doubted that, but I kept my mouth shut. A few of my friends agreed with me, saying that I wasn't obligated to clean up my sister's mess. Others, though, said that family is family and that I should just help her out and let her learn her lesson later. But would she really learn anything if she kept getting bailed out? That was my biggest concern. Now, my relationship with Lily is strained. She's barely speaking to me, and when she does, it's short and icy. My parents are still pressuring me to reconsider, and while part of me feels guilty, another part of me knows I did the right thing. I worked too hard to build my financial stability to just throw it away on someone else's poor decisions. I don't want to be an enabler. But now, I can't shake the feeling that I might be the villain in my family's eyes. Am I the asshole for refusing to help her after she spent all her money on a lavish wedding? Update 1. I thought that after I refused to pay Lily's rent, the situation would calm down temporarily. Maybe she would be angry for a while, give me the cold shoulder, vent to a few friends, and eventually come to terms with the fact that she had to deal with the consequences of her own decisions. I figured she would either sit down with Jake and come up with a plan to cut costs, or they would scramble to find another way, maybe taking on extra work, maybe negotiating with their landlord, maybe even borrowing from someone else. But in my mind, that was their problem to solve, not mine. I wasn't going to let guilt dictate my financial decisions, especially when it was so clear that Lily's predicament was the direct result of her own reckless spending. I had done my part by warning her, and she had ignored me. Now, she would have to face reality. But reality, as it turned out, was something my family had no intention of letting her face alone. Literally the next day, my phone rang. I didn't think much of it at first, until I saw my mother's name on the screen. My stomach tightened. I hesitated for just a second before answering, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to go well. The moment I picked up, I could tell something was off. Her voice was firm, tinged with irritation, the way it used to be when I was a teenager and had done something she disapproved of. It wasn't quite anger, but it was close. "Lily just called me," she said, her tone clipped, almost rehearsed. "She said that you refused to help, so I told her that I would talk to you." There was no question in her voice, no curiosity about my side of the story. Just an assumption, a decision already made. "We all know that you can afford it, and I think you are just overreacting. She is your sister, she is in a difficult situation right now, and I am counting on you." I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. So my mother had already decided for me that I would pay. That was it. No discussion, no consideration for how I felt about it, just an expectation. As if my money wasn't mine, but a resource to be distributed whenever family needed it. As if I didn't have the right to say no, because I had the means to say yes. A slow wave of frustration rose in me, but I kept my voice as calm as possible. I took a deep breath and tried to explain. I told her that it was not my responsibility to clean up this mess. That I had warned Lily countless times, that she had every opportunity to scale back but chose not to, that she and Jake had made these decisions knowing full well they didn't have the money. I reminded her that it wasn't like an emergency had wiped them out, this wasn't medical bills, a job loss, or some unavoidable disaster. This was the direct result of their reckless spending. They had drained their savings, maxed out their credit cards, spent everything they had on one single event, and now they wanted me to be the safety net they never bothered to set up for themselves. I thought that would make my mother see my point, that she would at least understand why I was hesitant. But she wouldn't listen to anything I had to say. She cut me off mid-sentence, her voice sharper this time, edged with frustration. "Don't be stubborn," she said, as if I were a child refusing to share my toys. "This is not the time for lessons. This is the time to support your family." I could almost hear the unspoken judgment in her voice, that I was being difficult, that I was being selfish, that I was putting my own principles above my own blood. That was when I realized there was no reasoning with her. In her mind, I wasn't refusing to enable Lily's poor choices, I was just choosing not to care. It didn't matter that I had helped Lily in the past. It didn't matter that I had already spent money on her wedding, that I had given her advice she had ignored, that I had my own financial goals and responsibilities. None of that mattered. What mattered was that my sister had made a mess, and I wasn't willing to clean it up for her. I could feel my frustration building, pressing against my ribs like something solid, something heavy. But I refused to let it show in my voice. I forced myself to stay calm, to stay steady. I told her that I wasn't going to pay, and that if she felt so strongly about it, then she could help Lily herself. There was silence on the other end of the line. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to think, for half a heartbeat, that she might reconsider. That she might understand. But then, a sigh. Deep, heavy, filled with disappointment. The kind of sigh that used to make me feel like I had done something terribly wrong when I was younger. And then she spoke again, her voice quieter this time, but colder than before. "I'm ashamed of you." And then she hung up. Update 2. The next day, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen and immediately felt my stomach tighten. It was Lily. I debated for a second whether to answer or let it go to voicemail, but before I could decide, my finger was already swiping across the screen. The second I picked up, she didn't even bother with pleasantries. No greeting, no hesitation. She blurted it out, her voice sharp and expectant, as if this was just a formality and the outcome had already been decided. "Where is my money?" I blinked, caught completely off guard. For a second, I thought I had misheard. "What other money?" I asked, my voice slower this time, careful, trying to make sense of what she was talking about. But she answered so matter-of-factly, so confidently, as if the decision had already been made without me. "Mom said that you would pay, so I'm waiting." I felt a rush of disbelief, a cold wave of frustration settling in my chest. Had my mother really gone and told Lily that I was going to pay, without even confirming it with me? Had she just decided, completely on her own, that I would be the one to fix this? It was like I wasn't even a person with my own choices, I was just a resource, a solution to their problems, a bank account they felt entitled to. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Lily, can you even hear yourself? These are not my problems. Maybe you should reduce your appetites, get smart, and earn your own money." The words came out before I could stop them, sharper than I had intended, but I didn't regret them. She had put herself in this situation, and now she was demanding that I fix it like it was my job. But Lily didn't take well to hearing the truth. She exploded. Her voice rose, high and shrill, filled with rage. She screamed that I was cruel, that I was selfish, that I could help but was choosing to let her suffer. She said I was abandoning her, leaving her in trouble when I had the ability to make it all go away. The entitlement in her voice was staggering. It was as if she genuinely believed that having money meant I had an obligation to use it for her benefit, that my refusal wasn't a decision but a betrayal. I felt something snap inside me. I couldn't listen to it anymore. The sheer audacity of it all, the way she was treating me not as a sister but as some kind of personal ATM, was too much. Without another word, I hung up. I wasn't going to waste another second arguing with someone who refused to take accountability for her own choices. But as I sat there, fuming, a thought crossed my mind. What did Jake think about all of this? Was he on board with this? Had he been part of the plan to guilt me into paying, or was this all Lily's doing? I needed to know. Without giving myself time to second guess, I dialed his number. He picked up after a couple of rings, sounding casual, even a little surprised to hear from me. I asked him if he knew about Lily's demand for money, if he was aware of what she was trying to pull. He was silent for a second, as if trying to decide how to respond, and then he sighed. "Yeah, I already solved that." The words hit me like a slap. He had already paid the rent. The crisis was over. The problem that had supposedly left Lily in such desperate need, the thing she had screamed at me for refusing to help with, had already been handled. Jake had taken care of it. And yet she had still called me, demanding money as if nothing had changed. The realization hit me all at once, a mix of shock and exhaustion weighing down on me. I asked Jake why, then. Why had she still called me? Why had she still acted like she was on the verge of losing everything? Why had she tried so hard to make me feel guilty if the rent was no longer an issue? Jake hesitated, and then, with another sigh, he gave me an answer that somehow managed to be even worse than what I had expected. "She keeps saying you should give her the money anyway. She says it's fair because you were at the wedding and enjoyed it." For a second, I thought he was joking. I wanted to believe he was joking. But there was no humor in his voice, no indication that this was anything other than what it was. Lily had already gotten what she needed. The rent was paid. There was no crisis, no emergency, no desperate situation left to fix. And yet, in her mind, I still owed her money. Because I had attended her wedding. Because I had been there to witness the extravagance, to eat the expensive food, to enjoy the over-the-top celebration that she and Jake had chosen to throw despite not being able to afford it. In her mind, that meant I was still financially obligated to contribute. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The sheer entitlement of it was staggering. She had a fairy tale wedding, then got into debt, her husband already paid the rent, but she still thinks I owe her money. Update 3. A few days passed, and I hoped, that the situation had finally settled. The tension that had been looming over me like a dark cloud seemed to dissipate, if only slightly. I hadn't heard from Lily or my mother, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I allowed myself to breathe. The constant pressure, the guilt-tripping, the relentless insistence that I was somehow responsible for fixing a mess I hadn't created, it had all gone quiet. And a part of me wanted to believe they had both finally come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to cave. Maybe they had realized that no matter how many times they called, no matter how much disappointment they tried to weigh me down with, I wasn't going to change my mind. I wasn't an open wallet they could dip into whenever they wanted. I wasn't some endless safety net that would always catch Lily when she stumbled, no matter how recklessly she had jumped. Maybe Lily had finally taken a long, hard look at her choices and understood that she had no one to blame but herself. Maybe, just maybe, this whole exhausting ordeal was finally over. And then my phone rang again. The moment I saw Lily's name on the screen, my stomach twisted. My hand hovered over the phone for a second, debating. I had thought I was done with this, thought she had finally understood that there was nothing more to discuss. But clearly, she wasn't finished. A small, tired part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to refuse to engage, to shut it down before it could even begin. But there was also curiosity simmering underneath the frustration. What could she possibly have left to say? I braced myself as I picked up. Her voice was different this time. It wasn't sharp with anger or thick with tears. It was calm. Too calm. There was an unsettling casualness to it, as if this was just a normal conversation and not the continuation of a drawn-out battle. There was no mention of our last conversation, no acknowledgement of the yelling, the accusations, the sheer entitlement she had flung at me days before. She got straight to the point, her voice smooth and almost pleasant, as if she were asking me for a small favor. She wanted to talk about money again. The audacity of it hit me like a wave. After everything, after all the screaming, the guilt-tripping, the passive-aggressive remarks from her mother, she was still trying. She was still pushing, still treating my money as something she could bargain for. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the last few days of silence had never existed. As if she could just pick up where she left off, pretending that her last attempt hadn't ended with her hanging up on me. But this time, I wasn't going to play along. This time, I wasn't going to let her drag me into another exhausting, circular conversation where she twisted reality to suit her own version of events. I had already learned the full truth, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite the story. I cut her off before she could even begin her usual performance. I told her, plain and simple, that I knew. I knew Jake had already paid the rent. I knew there was no emergency, no looming financial crisis, no desperate need. I knew she was still trying to push for more money, not because she needed it, but because she thought she could get it. Because, in her mind, it was easy for me to give it. Because she assumed that since I had it, I should part with it, no questions asked. For the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, there was silence. A long, heavy, suffocating silence. She had nothing to say. For once, there was no immediate counterargument, no dramatic sob story, no exaggerated explanation of how she was struggling. She mumbled something, but it was barely coherent, an awkward, stumbling attempt to say something without actually having anything meaningful to say. It was clear she hadn't expected this. She had come into the conversation assuming it would go the same way as before, that I would argue, that I would get defensive, that I would feel the weight of guilt pressing down on me and eventually give in. She had been ready for a fight. But instead, I had shut it down before it could even begin. And without that fight, without the usual back and forth, she had nothing left. Then, after another beat of silence, she finally spoke again. Her voice was different this time, softer, but laced with quiet resentment. She said she thought families were supposed to help each other. That was it. No more anger, no more entitlement, just a simple, disappointed statement, as if I had somehow failed her in some fundamental way. As if my refusal to hand over money had made me the bad sister, the uncaring one, the selfish one. As if my unwillingness to let her use me meant I didn't understand what family was supposed to be. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. I told her that families were supposed to support each other, not use each other. That being family didn't mean she was entitled to my money. That having more than someone else didn't mean I was obligated to give. That she had spent months planning a wedding she couldn't afford, ignoring every warning, brushing off every concern, and now that it had all backfired, she wanted someone else to bear the consequences. That wasn't support. That wasn't love. That was manipulation. There was no response. No arguments, no protests. Just the quiet sound of the line disconnecting as she hung up. And then, just like that, it was over. She didn't call me again after that. My mother, who had been relentless in her attempts to guilt me into paying, suddenly stopped as well. No more messages filled with disappointment, no more accusations of selfishness, no more sighs laced with shame. It was as if they had finally realized that this wasn't a battle they could win. That no amount of pressure or guilt would change my mind. That I wasn't going to be bullied into giving away my money just because I had it. And without that leverage, without the belief that they could push me until I broke, there was nothing left to say. Days turned into weeks, and the silence remained. At first, it felt strange, like the absence of something I had become used to, something that had been so persistent it had felt almost permanent. But as time passed, the weight of it lifted, and I found myself feeling lighter, freer. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't have to justify my own financial decisions to people who refused to take responsibility for theirs. Then, one evening, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Lily. It was short, almost hesitant. She said she was sorry. That she had been stressed and had probably allowed herself too much. That was it. No long explanation, no dramatic apology, just those few words. I stared at the message for a long time. I wanted to believe that she had really learned something from this, that she had finally understood why I had refused. That she had taken a step toward maturity, toward accountability, toward breaking the cycle of expecting others to clean up her mess. I wanted to believe that this was real. I hoped she really understood.